Oh, those things. All right.
Yeah,
There's
And I
two.
think that's it.
we're live.
We're
Okay,
live.
we're live. Excellent. Okay. So welcome everyone. We'll wait another few minutes, a minute or two until people join in. There are just making sure everyone is on board with the Juno technology and finding our room and all of that. So we'll give it a minute or two. Excellent.
And then I
I
will
see people
also
trickling
add the
in.
link to I'll add the link to the collaborative notes once I see more people joining the room.
Yeah, we'll probably do that
I
multiple
see
times.
Cheryl's name there.
Yeah.
She will be presenting at
Okay.
iAssist.
Great. Hi, everyone. Okay. All right. Good. All right. So, excuse me. I think we can start our session. And as people join us, we'll just make sure that we add anything to the chat, the link to the collaborative notes, and so forth. So Tumai will be putting that in. There it is. And so Tumai and Floria, if I can ask you, excuse me, to turn your microphones off, just to make sure that we're an optimal situation here. So, so hi everyone, and welcome. This is our session on progress report for the CURE-FAIR working group. We have been around. We've been recognized since what was it, July of 2020, and have been working hard since then. We'll tell you all about that. We have a lot to share with you. And so this is really meant to kind of give you an overview of the group and the work that we've been doing, and also to give you the update, and then to encourage and ask for your participation. And we're hoping also that the latter half of the presentation is going to be very interactive. So first things first, again, welcome everyone if you're just joining us. There's a link to the collaborative notes, also should be in the chat on the right-hand side of your Juno screen, but it's also a bit.ly you can copy from here. And we also have, just to point out, we have all of the CURE-FAIR working group materials on OSF as an OSF project in addition to our RDA page, but on the OSF project, we have a lot of details also about the subgroups. So that's another good place to go to find information. So if you would, you can open the collaborative notes right now, and you can add your name. There's a place to add your name to the participant list. I want to remind everyone the event is being recorded, and it will be made publicly available through the RDA. So a couple of tips before we get started. So everyone's used to this by now, but please do make sure that your microphone is off and your camera's off when you're not speaking. If you want to use the chat, please go ahead to send us any messages and any questions. We're not really going to be using the Q&A today. We figured we don't have a gigantic group. We can just use the chat, and we'll be monitoring that. So if you have anything that you'd like to add, ask questions, feel free to do that, and we'll probably call on you and ask you to turn your microphone on if there's a need to do that. And then you feel free to use the emojis. Everyone can try now. You can do the thumbs up. Let us know that it's working. Perfect. Awesome. Thanks very much. So we have today 3 moderators from this group, but I do want to introduce the full group of presenters. A couple of people will be joining later or at the repeat sessions. So in alphabetical order, we have today Florio Arguelles, who is a research associate at the Cornell Institute for Social and Economic Research at CISR at Cornell University. We'll hear from Tumai Christian, Assistant Director for Archives at the Odum Institute at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Mandy Gooch is Research Data Archivist, also at the Odom Institute, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Mandy will be joining us a little bit later. Tom Honeyman, Program Manager from Software Program at the Australian Research Data Commons. Tom, unfortunately, can't be with us today, but he will be here for the repeat session, and he's a central part of our working group efforts. And my name is Limor Pierre. I'm Associate Director for Research at the Institution for Social and Policy Studies at Yale University. So our agenda for today is to give you a little overview of the working group and our goals and our sort of plan for how we're going to get there with our goals. We're going to give you some updates from the subgroups that we have that have been working on specific tasks. And then we have, as I mentioned earlier, a more interactive part of the session where we're hoping to have a conversation, and we have some props for you to do that, and then we'll wrap up. So stepping back for a minute on CURE-FAIR and the work group, from our charter, we specify that our goal is to establish standards-based guidelines for curation of reproducible and fair data and code. There's a lot of loaded words in there, and I'll try to unpack that in a minute. But basically, what we are our kind of working assumption is that research outputs in and of themselves are very valuable and necessary, obviously, for science and are being used in science. And as such, they should be fair, comply with the FAIR principles. Fair data, obviously, is something that everyone is now familiar with, and there's a fantastic working group working on FAIR for research software. Obviously, also very relevant to the work that we're doing. So these objects, in and of themselves, are inherent and should be fair. In addition, or beyond that, they also interact with each other to produce specific findings or results. And that is the process that we're trying to capture. That is what we're interested in. So our ultimate objective as a working group is to improve the fairness and the long-term usability of what we're calling reproducible file bundles across different domains, with the understanding that these things operate in slightly different ways across domains. So most of the principles in this group are from the social sciences. That is our lens and how we view things, but we've been working very closely and have had significant contributions in our subgroup work from folks in other areas, computer science and research software engineers, and folks from other disciplines like life sciences and climate sciences, and they have slightly different ways to look at that and slightly different constraints and requirements. But as a principle, we think that our approach kind of cuts across the different, all the different disciplines. So again, in the spirit of clarifying some of what we are talking about, just to avoid any confusion, we're really talking about, when we're talking about reproducibility, we're really talking about computational reproducibility. So by that, we mean the ability to repeat analysis and arrive at the same result. I don't think I need to say to this group and you all in the audience, but there has been a lot of conversation about reproducibility. There have been multiple definitions. There have been projects trying to kind of like map out all the definitions of reproducibility. But I think that the field and this area is really matured enough at this point in a nice way, to the point where we're kind of converging on a common definition of what we mean by reproducibility and computational reproducibility specifically. And so we lean on the report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that came out in 2019. We lean on the work of Victoria Staden. And this is, and in fact, those of you who are familiar with the ACM, who has done a lot of work on reproducibility and badges and other work like that, they've recently revised their terminology to conform to this definition as well. So as I said, I think that that we're maturing enough at this point to kind of converge on a common definition. So the term curation is also a term of art that we think needs to be clarified a little bit, especially for those who are not coming from the data management, data curation, data archiving background. The term curation can connote a bunch of different things. Sometimes people think of museum curators and people whose job is it to put together things of interest to others. There's definitely a link to that kind of understanding of the term curation, but it also has a specific meaning in the data world, which has to do with the management and the preservation of digital data over long term. And it really has to do with a set of actions that specific actors will take in order to enhance the digital objects. And I'm saying digital objects now sort of as a placeholder for data, code, any digital object. So a set of activities that enhance and add value to these digital objects in order to be able to enable access and preservation for the long term. So that's what we mean by curation. So bringing it all together, for us, when we talk about curating for reproducibility, we're talking about curating this reproducible file bundle and including all of its component parts. So, and so you might have different digital objects that interact with each other, and because they eventually because they originally produced a certain scientific claim or finding. So all of those objects are of interest to us, and including, what is in these files and the dependencies and kind of the entire system, really. So again, the goal is to enable continued access and independent reuse of this entire bundle for the long term. I'll put a caveat here because clearly there are exceptions, there are challenges, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that is, I just want to kind of state that up front, that is our general goal. So as a work group, we're committed to providing 3 deliverables, really with the final report being our major deliverable, and the other number 1 and 2 here are kind of like interim or in service of this final report. So our first interim deliverable is a snapshot of the current state of CURE-FAIR practices, and we're drawing upon community surveys and reviews of practice, and we'll tell you where we are with that a little bit later. Our second deliverable is to put together a synthesis of the practices that relate to curating for computational reproducibility and FAIR principles. So taking a closer look at, in practice, when people are making sure that FAIR principles apply, speaking very broadly right now, what is the overlap between those practices and practices that are meant to ensure that something is reproducible in the long term? And then our final deliverable will be a report that outlines standards-based guidelines for CURE-FAIR best practices in publishing and archiving computationally reproducible studies. And that includes computational methods and materials. So, I mean, one thing, the way I started to really, that has helped me in articulating what we're doing a little bit better recently is this last line here, really. We're looking for effective curation workflows for publishing FAIR data and code that support the reproducibility of scientific claims. So I think that helps narrow the scope for us. We're looking at reproducibility of scientific claims, not just reproducibility per se. That's one important point to make. And the other important point to make, I think, is that our starting point is that scientific claim. That is what we want to curate. So that sort of goes above and beyond, in a way, of curating data or curating code or software. because we're looking at it in that context of a particular scientific claim. So to help us with kind of organize all the work that we're trying to do in the working group, we established 4 subgroups, and in Plenary 16 and maybe even 15, we invited the community to join us, and that is not only in the past tense. You can still join the groups, and there's a link for you here if you are interested in joining the work of any of these groups. There are 4 groups, as I mentioned: 1 on CURE-FAIR definitions, 1 on practices, subgroup 3 on challenges, and subgroup 4 on basically on alliances within RDA. So having to do with questions of how our work fits within the work of other groups in the RDA and RDA in general. So the next part of the presentation is going to be a report or an update from each of the subgroups. We'll hear a little bit from each, and then we will have, as I mentioned, an interactive session and kind of a discussion and the ability to open it up to some of your questions and some of your thoughts. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and hand it over to Mai, who's going to be talking about subgroup 1 and 2.
All right, thank you, Limor. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of kind of what we're trying to do. And my, can you see my slides yet? Yes. Okay. So talking about our working groups, I'm just going to run through those, give you some idea of what we've been up to, and hopefully pique your interest and get some of you to join and contribute to some of our efforts. So starting with subgroup 1, CURE-FAIR definitions. So the purpose of subgroup 1 is to gain a better understanding of what it means to curate research artifacts for the purposes of supporting research reproducibility. And like Limor said, we're talking about those scientific claims. So what do we need to do to curate all those artifacts that support those scientific claims? And then also thinking about how, oops, sorry about that, and how those things operate in the context of FAIR principles. We know that there should be some alignment, some mapping that we could do between those definitions and the FAIR principles. So what the subgroup has been doing so far, first is going through the literature, looking for definitions of computational reproducibility. And in those definitions, try to find those definitions in the context of the different objects. So the software, the code, the data, and also mapping those to FAIR principles, and also in different contexts, disciplinary context. And so we've started collecting some of those materials. We know that any definition of curating for reproducibility is going to need to be broad, but because there are so many differences depending on the object and also the domain. And so what we're looking for are more references to literature, any type of resources. They could be websites, something from different domains or projects that can help us get more information, more granular information for those unique cases. And so what we've done is we started a Zotero resource library, and we're hoping that some of you may be able to contribute to this library. And so this is what it will look like, just like others. I know a lot of you are familiar with Zotero, but we want to put all those resources in a place so we can have an understanding of curation for reproducibility, and then be able to access information about the specifics depending on the object and the domain. And so what we plan on doing is collecting all these materials and then also tagging them with the object with the FAIR principle if there's some mention of that, or if we see some alignment, and also the domain, so that way it'd be easy for us to use. And we think that this could be a valuable resource for the entire community, anybody that's interested in this. So if you'd like to contribute, we made it easy, so you don't have to go into Zotero yet, but there's a Google form. Any information you have on any resource, maybe something you've written or a colleague, just pop it in that form, and then we will add it to the Zotero library. So we would greatly appreciate that. And just going back, and if you'd like to join this, if you want to talk more about these definitions and how we present that in the final report, it would be great if you can join this subgroup so we can talk about that. Okay, and then subgroup. Oh, and by the way, I want to mention Mandy Gucci is going to be late, but she's the one who is leading this subgroup. And then for subgroup 2, CURE-FAIR practices. So here in this subgroup, we are trying to explore curation for reproducibility practices as they are implemented in different disciplinary domains and by different stakeholder groups. We know that there are people who are doing at least some aspects of curation for reproducibility, and we want to know more about that. So what we've been doing is we've been trying to identify organization and groups who have implemented CURE-FAIR workflows, whether they're providing us services or they're doing on behalf of their own organizations and the research that they're putting out there. And what we've done is our group has thought about what do we want to know from these organizations so that we can show some examples, some models of these practices. And so we developed a standard form to collect profile information from CURE-FAIR implementers. And we are still in the process of collecting some of that information. So if you are part of an organization that is implemented, or if you know of an organization that has implemented some of these things, we really would love for you to tell us more. And so we have a standard Qualtrics form that you can fill out. It shouldn't take too long. The kinds of questions we're asking, we want to know how, from your perspective, you're defining reproducibility. So what is the purpose of the services and the curation that you've implemented? We want to know about the tools and services that either you're using or providing in order to execute these workflows. I think another important thing that we came up with was thinking about the organizational commitment. Are there certain organizations that are better suited based on their missions and how much commitment in terms of funding, resources, staff? And then also we want to know what kinds of technology standards, best practices that inform your practice, the tools and services that you're providing. And so if you are one of these organizations, please go ahead and go to this form. It shouldn't take you too long, I promise. And you can fill that out. And once we get all of that information, we're going to collect all of that so we can present to the community what's going on and see if there are any commonalities across these organizations. Maybe some information, it'll be evident what it really takes to do this and do it successfully. So that's another way that you can help us out. And I know there are a lot of you out there. I see some names in the list, so please fill that out. We would greatly appreciate it. And then for subgroup 3, I will let Florio talk about what's been happening with subgroup 3.
So hi everyone. I'm going to talk about subgroup 3. Subgroup 3 is about CURE-FAIR challenges. The aim of subgroup 3 is to describe the challenges of preparing and reusing materials required for computational reproducibility. The group has reviewed the literature and collected use cases, stories, and interviews with various stakeholders such as researchers, publishers, funders, data professionals, IT, and repositories who are trying to computationally reproduce scientific results and processes. We held meetings between September 2020 and January 2021 to plan for ways to collect information about challenges, analyze that information, and discuss a framework for challenges, and begin drafting a report based on our findings. We are glad to say that we have completed our report, and it is now under review as an official RDA supporting output. Our subgroup is now wrapping up our activities and not taking in any new members. However, please join the other subgroups. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, our report is now under review as an official RDA supporting output. On the left is an image of the front page of that report with the link to the report on the top right. I'll share with you briefly the main insights that we gathered from our activities. Tumai, can you go back to the slide? Okay, thank you. So the first main challenge experienced by those who are preparing or attempting computational reproducibility is the lack of clarity on standards for computational reproducibility. Tumai, can you go back one slide? Thank you. We find variation in the meaning and the practice of computational reproducibility. There is a need to define criteria for what should be reproduced, what should be archived, and for how long, and how to determine whether computational reproducibility is possible or practical. The second main challenge is sociocultural factors or human factors. Several challenges have to do with human factors at the micro level, like insufficient training and skills, and at the macro level, like lack of awareness in some domains, professional incentive structures that still do not privilege reproducibility work. These factors in combination contribute to insufficient progress on creating conditions for widespread adoption of computational reproducibility. The third main challenge is the R in FAIR, which is reusable. The ability to reuse digital materials when preparing or attempting computational reproducibility is the most common challenge reported. In the context of computational reproducibility, the digital object is a process that comprises various components like code, data, workflow, and execution or computational environment. The components in the process as a whole need to be fair. Fourth main challenge is that machine readable is not enough. FAIR must be human readable as well. Computational reproducibility by humans requires that they understand what scripts are intended to do and why. Moreover, since in many cases, not all steps in the workflow are script-based, the next best thing is proper documentation and metadata so that humans can interpret the scripts and understand their function in order to attempt computational reproducibility. The fifth main challenge is that solutions tend to be ad hoc and not fair. Some practical difficulties are met with improvised solutions by those attempting computational reproducibility. For example, creating an implementation based on the methods description in the paper when the original code is not provided. These solutions often do not advance transparency and reproducibility on the whole. Finally, the sixth main challenge is the difference across stakeholders and domains. Special attention must be given to the requirements and the practices of different scholarly domains, and indeed to the raw materials that comprise an academic field. In addition, different stakeholders emphasize different computational reproducibility challenges. Solutions addressing the feasibility of computational reproducibility need to consider these contexts. Next slide, please, Tumai. So now I'm going to report to give you an update on Subgroup 4. I'll be speaking from Honeyman, who is this group. Subgroup 4 is about CURE-FAIR alliances. CURE-FAIR Subgroup 4 is continuing to seek appropriate points of coordination in the activities it is conducting, especially with RDA. This includes a broad view of areas of research actively concerned with reproducibility. For this activity, we have some targeted approaches to the FAIR for Research Software Working Group. We are awaiting to see what the form of the FAIR principles for research software takes. FAIR for Research Survey Group also has a deliverable of guidelines relating to these principles. We intend to harmonize our outputs to these principles. In particular, if the principles or guidelines touch upon aspects of computational reproducibility, especially runnability or execution environment, we will be looking to build upon this work. Within RDA group structures, we are investigating whether a refreshed reproducibility interest group might be a good parent interest group for this working group, especially once the work is complete, and as a place to initiate any branching activity. If there are any attendees present, especially members of the former reproducibility interest group, who might be interested in starting the group up again, then please get in contact. Finally, if your interest in CURE-FAIR is primarily to ensure harmony between this group and the interest or working group you're more heavily involved in, please join or contact this subgroup at any time and let us know. We'll be very happy to talk. To my next slide, please.
right, thank you so much, Florio. So those are all the updates. The link to the subgroup sign up there is on the bottom. If we haven't said enough, please join as we're approaching the final phase of this working group. And also, I think, thinking about the interest group as well, because it seems like there's still a lot of work to do around this area for different areas of computational reproducibility. But at this point, we want to have you all give us some information. So on the screen here, we're going to do a poll everywhere. So if you can either open another window and type in this URL for the poll everywhere, that will take you to the polls that we can so that you can respond to a few questions and we could see it here on the screen. Or if you would rather use your phone, you could use your QR code reader and just point it at this QR code, and that should open up the poll for you. So I'll just give you all a couple moments to access that. And if you could, maybe with the thumbs up, let me know if you're in. Yep, so we got some people that are in. Thank you. I will advance the slide and the URL will still come up there at the top. So yes, the first question is, we are curious to know from where you are joining us today. And it looks like we see some dots here all over the place. This is nice.
No, because we know that there are different practices and
different laws and different funding models. Some of these practices are implemented, so we know that there could be some differences there, and also to see if maybe there are some areas of the world that we haven't done a good job in collaborating with to learn more about what's going on there. So it looks like lots of Europe. I see China, Canada, so we have North America here. That's where we're all from. So Tom is from Australia, so we know that we would have a green dot there. So South America and Africa, we need to find some of our friends there who are doing this work. Okay, so the next question, we'd like to know, what is your primary role at your institution? We know that depending on your perspective and the work that you're doing, how you're engaged in data curation or curation for reproducibility can change. So we've got our data professionals, our repository folks, researchers. It's nice to see that there are a lot of researchers here, and I think that's what's unique about RDA. We not only get the folks who are supporting researchers, but also the researchers themselves, which I think is really valuable to get, so we could better understand their needs. We could serve them based on their needs and preferences. So we have no information technologists, funders, or publishers here. We know that there are some publishers who have implemented, oh, there we go, we have a publisher who has implemented some of these things, maybe to support policies for their journals. So good. It looks like we have some decent representation here. And I know there may be some overlap as well. There could be repository professionals who are doing a lot of the infrastructure work, so some of the IT things or cyber infrastructure. Same thing with data professionals. All right. Next question. So we also want to know, which type of research artifact or artifacts do you mostly focus on in your role? So are you mostly dealing with data? Maybe you're focused on documentation, workflows. So we'd like to get a sense of which objects you're engaged in. Is it coming up yet? I don't see responses yet, so maybe we're having issues with this particular one, the slide.
I was able to select, but it doesn't seem to come on your slide.
Oh, okay. Huh. So you were able to select, well, I know it's recording the response, or could just be some link. Let's go ahead and move to the next question. Maybe there's a refresh thing that's happening. Let's go to the next question. Hopefully this one works. We'd like to know, where have you found useful information about curation for reproducibility practice? If you are doing curation for reproducibility, or if you're trying to learn about curation for reproducibility, we want to know, where are you looking for this information, or where have you found some useful information? So we want to get a sense of what is informing your practice. Oh, good, yay, this one works. Yes, Victoria Stodden is definitely somebody who's written a lot about computational reproducibility. If you see anything that I've written, there's probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 references from her. So colleagues, yes, RDA is a great place, and I'm glad that we're all part of this community. Yes, Forest 11 and CoData, and that's one of the reasons why one of our subgroups, our subgroup 4, is focused on those alliances. Because we know that other people are producing great outputs to inform our practice. So Software Preservation Network, yes. Project Tier is great. They have a nice, if you're not familiar with it, they have a nice kind of framework for the materials and organization of reproducible file bundles. AEA, I'm thinking that that's the American Economic Association, perhaps. They have their data editors. I think Lars is on the line, but he has provided great information on how they've implemented. Software Heritage, yes. Any last minutes ones to add? Oh, with a URL, the Brazil Roundtable on Workflow and Reproducibility, including machine learning. I think that's something that the machine learning is something that we will need to pay attention to. There are all kinds of implications embedded in machine learning. Open source and free software resources, absolutely. And, you know, even though we as a group have been able to come up with quite a few responses here, there isn't a lot out there. And hopefully we can resolve that by identifying all these places, putting them together in that library, and also in our outputs to have some references for folks. And hopefully our output can be added to this list. Not a lot of people have implemented this, as far as we know. Hopefully there are. It's just that we don't know all of them, but we do hope that the practice is more widely adopted, and we'll have more resources, or we can contribute to those resources for those of you who are engaged in this kind of work. So thank you for those responses. The next question is, if you could tell us, this is kind of is connected to the previous question, but name the individuals, organizations, and or domains who are doing curation for reproducibility well. So we know they may be you and your organization, so please don't be shy about naming yourself. But this will help us also with the work we're doing to find those implementers. So we'd like to know who they are. So yes, the Odom Institute and CISR both have services for pre-publication or pre-publication review. Tate, that's great. And, you know, this could also be, you know, maybe if there are aspects of it that you think that we need to know about when it comes to curation for reproducibility. So, like, for example, in the previous question, somebody put software heritage. So maybe not the full workflow, but we know that that their contribution can be useful. Climate science, definitely. Yeah, we have some domains: AEA, political science, crystallography, astronomy. And we'll discover, that's something that we'll discover in our kind of exploration of these different groups, is to find out why are they far ahead of other domains. What is it about crystallography and astronomy or AEA or political science that that is allowing them to make good progress? So if we can learn from them, we can hopefully be able to make as much progress as they have. IEEE, definitely. Ben Marwick, I don't know Ben Marwick, and I perhaps I should be ashamed of that, but I will get to know Ben Marwick's work. Thank you. There's a few more coming in. Thank you. There it is. Thank you. Computational reproducibility in archaeological research, basic principles in a case study. Wonderful. Last minute entries. It's a pretty good collection to start with. Hotel, yes. Another Victoria Stodden project. This is in applied sciences. That is helpful. So we could find out, you know, when it comes to us thinking about computational reproducibility in code, to learn more from those domains, to see what they're doing. That could be useful. Easy, and that's emulation, software emulation. Gotcha. All right, thank you for all of those responses. And if I move too fast, you could also drop some more in the collaborative notes as well. Bioconductor. So I'm really glad that I'm seeing other domains beyond social sciences. So mentioning astronomy, crystallography, now this bioconductor. So this is great, life sciences. Okay, and the final question, for those of you who have not adopted these practices, I would like to know, what would you need to know in order to adopt these practices? So what information would be useful for you to be able to implement them at your organization or to support these practices? And some things that have come up before, one thing that people always, yes, funding. I was just about to say that. People want to know how to fund it. How much does it cost? How to make those services sustainable. How much effort and resources? And I think there are probably several ways to go about that. So hopefully learning from the organizations who have implemented it to find out how many full-time employees that they have. And also what kinds of skill sets do they have in order to support these practices? Yes, the skills. How many people? So a lot of questions about education and funding. Ensuring long-term compatibility, I think that's a good one. Resources to support researchers, absolutely. I think centering researchers is going to be important in some of this. Understanding our designated community in OAIS terms, standards and benchmarks, how much time, policy, community expectations. Definitely the institutional support. I think maybe we could learn more about that, how to elicit that support from our institutions, our administrators who hold the checkbook, making the business case and argument. These are all really great. And and I agree with all of this, that we do need to know this. And even for those of us who have adopted it, we do need continued support. So I think even for ODM, for example, we are still working to get more resources. So we do, sorry about that. So we do need to figure out how to make the business case for it. So sorry, I accidentally advanced. So here's a rerun of what some people put in here. So a lot of it's capacity, making the case, and it sounds like also the standards and considering the needs of the people who are likely to use these services is what I'm seeing from these responses. All right. Thank you so much for contributing to all of this. And again, if you have anything else you would like to add, please do put those in the notes. We want to make sure we capture any of this information so that we can move forward. Oh, roadmap from good to better to best. I really like that. Campus library and IT, incentives. How to prepare, so some of the guidance information, actual reuse, that is definitely important. I think there have been a couple of studies that came out recently about that in terms of looking at the reproducible file bundles and assessing their usability for that purpose. Train FAIR apart from just looking at the data? That's an interesting question. Okay. Let's, so thank you for all of your responses. I'm going to go ahead and move on from this poll, but like I said, please add any of your responses. I think, do we have time, Limor, to maybe open this up for more discussion before we move on to our timelines?
Yes, absolutely. I think we do. Not sure why my camera.
Turn off my screen for now.
Okay, here we go. I do think, yes, I think we have some time, and we haven't, we haven't had an opportunity to answer some direct questions that some people might have. So first of all, thank you for answering all these questions and giving us so much information. In the collaborative notes, Tumai, I don't know if you were able to see that while you were running the polls, but I made a note that we should copy and paste all the responses that we got. It was a little hard to keep track because we could only see like the top few, the responses as they were coming in. So it would be great we'll copy and paste so everybody could see that. And then I would just ask people to add if they have anything to add that they haven't thought about, or that they, just would want to add to that. So actually, well, maybe now we can just see if anyone has specific questions or topics that they want to raise. I feel like there were some things that came up for me as I was looking at all of these responses that I would want to throw back and open for discussion, but maybe let's see if any of the people who are attending would like to ask a question, emphasize, and so forth. If there are any topics that we haven't touched on yet. Tumai, is it possible for you while we're waiting to grab those responses or view them?
See if I could grab those.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I'd like to hear from those of you when it comes to things that you need to know. If you can talk about kind of what you envision maybe for your group. So if some of you said that there are resources, so kind of what you're imagining the service to look like. What is it that you want to do, that you want to provide for your community?
I can say something. Working with researchers sort of at this. So once the research is finished and they're ready to share the data, and at that sort of point in the research life cycle, it can be hard to even get them to help us with documentation. And I think at that point, sometimes too, it's almost too late to go back and get like all the dependencies accounted for. You know, if they weren't working in sort of a virtual environment to begin with, and can easily grab things like dependencies and haven't documented all of the steps in a way that's easy to sort of transfer over, it's almost, not that it's too late, but it just becomes a much greater burden. And so if there was a way to sort of have resources that we could upfront say, this is what's needed in order to accomplish this. And so people can be thinking about it sort of earlier in the process.
You know, I think that is a good point, because we do have that difficulty that it's so hard at the end. And so I think sometimes our services focus on the end of the life cycle. And so thinking about how we implement our workflows, how can we I guess, embed some of our services from the beginning. So I know, and we've been talking about that a lot, but it would be good to figure out if there are some groups who have been successful in having some interventions at the beginning of the life cycle instead of just at the end. So thank you for that, Aaron.
I can also add something maybe. So for an ideal world, we would like to be able to kind of publish a wider range of the stuff that we work on. I work at the National Infrastructure for Bioinformatics Supports, which means that we actually do analysis on the behalf of research projects. They specify the scope and provide the data, and then we develop pipelines and processes to get some data out for them. And we already help them to publish data, but it would be nice to kind of help them publish an entire reproducible package. So we have practices to make stuff reproducible in-house, and we keep things version controlled and managed in-house, but kind of providing some examples on how a published package could look like, so that it's an attractive option for the research groups as well.
So that is a great example, and hopefully you will fill out our survey. But that all of that is definitely something that we can look to as an example. And as you all are talking, I'm putting in all of the responses in the collaborative notes so you could see what other people have said in the poll everywhere.
Yes, thank you. Can I just follow up with Volmar for a second? I'm just curious. It sounds like you have already advanced capacity to do a lot for the researchers. I'm just wondering, when you say that what would you like to do is publish the entire reproducible package, what are specifically the things that you feel are missing? Is it a packaging problem? Is it that you don't have access to some of the components or objects that might be missing? In other words, is it more of a technical challenge? Is it an access challenge? Is it kind of a human challenge? Because there's some potentially, you know, I don't want to say lack of cooperation, but sort of like a lag time, kind of like what Aaron was saying, where it's hard to go back. Can you say more about what the challenge you think is?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a mix. So on the one hand, there's kind of a policy or incentives challenge. So the research groups that pay for the analysis aren't really interested in publishing the pipeline, so to speak. I mean, that's not their primary objective. They want to publish the paper, and to publish the paper, they also need to provide the data. So in those cases, we help them publish the data, but most journals don't ask for the code that supports it. So even though we have some staff that are very interested in being able to publish pipelines and code more openly, we can't do that unless the research project actually asks us to do it. So kind of finding some easy ways to explain what this means and what would be published, and maybe if there are, I mean, something corresponding to a data repository, but for kind of the software or pipeline, the reproducible bundle, so to speak, that can reference the data that is used as source materials to produce a certain output. I could also add that, I mean, some technical aspects could also be useful for kind of the structure. I mean, helping the developers of the pipelines to find good ways of documenting, I mean, adding metadata, knowing what formats they should prefer when packaging up their pipelines and so forth. That would probably also be helpful once the other challenges have been overcome.
That's great and very helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Do you see? I mean, I'm kind of trying to generalize from what you were saying to a potential problem also, which is that these pipeline developers, or maybe in other disciplines, we would just, you know, they might not be an entire pipeline, but it might be just some scripts. In some disciplines, there's not a lot of consistency, right? Basically, every researcher will create their own, or every group or every lab will have their own pipeline, potentially their own software, their own way of doing things. Is that kind of thing a problem? And I'm bringing this up because, and thank you, George, for the comment on Carol, and also the group on canonical workflows might be relevant here, you know, with this kind of idea of, okay, well, every research group, every lab might do things differently, and that's fine, because that's how science works, and we don't want to necessarily interfere with what scientists are doing. But is there something we can kind of extract above that, you know, abstract from that, in other words, to call this process of what they're doing, or this, you know, the software that they're creating, or whatever the thing is, and kind of categorize that as something more general, so that then we can kind of identify that. And I think that we have some maybe additional thoughts on that from George.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there's a big divide among disciplines in how they think about this stuff. So Carol Goebel in her group at Manchester and has done a tremendous amount of work on packaging and documenting workflows. And those workflows often sometimes consist of code, but they often consist of using APIs that for certain processes. A lot of her work has been in the life sciences and genomic area. We had a session on provenance capture at the CODATA FAIR Convergence Symposium in the last fall. And there tends to be a divide between disciplines that rely on that treat data as a kind of a unitary object. So if you think of a map, even though it's a lot of data, it's one thing, or a genome is the same way. That's very different from the way we tend to think about things in the social sciences, where we think about a data set as having dozens or hundreds or thousands of variables. And what we're interested in is a small subset of those variables, and we want to know how those variables affected, interacted, and what happened to each variable. So the work that Carol has done is at the workflow level, and it's not at the level of program steps within code. And there tends to be a difference between people who think on those disciplines that work on those two levels. So while if you're interested in documenting workflows, there's been a lot of really good work on that about how you link different code packages together. But if your workflow is you go into Stata or SPSS, and then you're looking, what matters are the individual commands that you do inside those programs, which is mostly what it is in the social sciences. You're in a different world, and there's even at the level of provenance languages, there's been quite a lot of work at the Prov language is really about workflows, and there have been a couple of attempts to extend it, notably one called Prov1, which can be extended down to steps within programs. But there's been a lot less development, as far as I can see, in providing extra tools to document at that level. So someone mentioned Wholetail, which is a project that my project has been working with. And Wholetail has been primarily about workflows. And we've been, our C2 metadata project has been working with them to try to give them tools for working at the program step level, at least in some languages, instead of at the workflow level. So I think Walmart, if you're working in the biomedical area and you don't know I strongly recommend you look into the work that Carol Goebel has done, because she's really about documenting workflows. And there are also developments of ways to package up things into objects, and I forget exactly what they're called now, but I think they were originally called research objects, and now they're called now. But maybe you know that stuff, Walmart.
We are quite familiar, but I did not stop you because I think this is a good conversation. So we do have practices for creating reusable and reproducible packages or bundles in-house, and we also teach that to kind of research groups across Sweden. but I mean, there's no standards for how these packages should look like. And I mean, there's a lot more in the FAIR concept. I mean, how do you make them findable and accessible and things like that? We put things on GitHub, but I mean, only if the researcher is actually interested in that and knows what that means. So there's a big kind of knowledge gap between the researchers who kind of enlist our services and the kind of publishing landscape. I mean, these more technical implementations or solutions that will make sure that we can get the same results from the same inputs and environments.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the social sciences, I don't think there's very much use of GitHub. I could be wrong about that. And the other thing is that in the other disciplines, there's a much greater use of semantic web tools and RDF and ontologies, and of registering things with URIs, which is something that I don't think has hit the social sciences at all yet.
On a note on the kind of the use of ontologies and shared vocabularies, I think that there is probably more of a challenge. I mean, or at least in our organization, that we already have the kind of the technical stuff in place for doing the kind of computational process and packaging reproducible, but then making sure that the research projects that are responsible for the contents of their data sets, encoding their values, I mean, the names of their observations or the names of the tissues and so forth, keeping those in line with community standards and referencing shared ontologies so that another research group could reuse it. So that's something that me and my team of data stewards work on. But that is as part of publishing data sets, not as part of working with the actual source code or pipelines from that perspective.
And that's a really great approach. And thinking about centering the researchers, Shelley, you mentioned in the chat about some work you're doing as a society publisher. You mentioned you're working on guidance for authors, and we know as much as we can support, researchers with tools and things, it really is, up to them to really implement these practices from the get-go as part of their research process. Can you talk about the work that you've been doing?
Yeah. So, of course, we have a wide variety of data types, and especially within our modeling community, just they're getting their arms around this as well. So our first tactic was to try to figure out how do we, if somebody comes to us with, say, a CodeOcean capsule or a Wholetail link, what should we say? What should we tell them to do, right? Put your information about where it's available here, cite it there. Like, how do we say that? So as we were getting our arms around that, we're like, okay, well, we have to move faster. It's coming. This is happening more and more often, and we need to telegraph the importance of reproducibility. So we have text. I wish I had finished it last year. We're just now getting to it. Lots of things in the air. We have text, it's not easy. So what we want to guarantee, I hate using that word, what we'd like to see happen is that the producers of each of the elements of the pieces of your collection get the credit they deserve in the existing automated way. That in and of itself is not smooth. It's not smooth for a data set by itself with its own DOI. If you have a different persistent identifier, that frankly doesn't work well, just because of how journals function right now. And then if you make it in a collection, there's no transitive property that acknowledges the elements of the collection at all. So we're actually hosting a community of practice on this. I use that term separately from how RDA uses it, so I don't want that to be confusing. It's meant to be a focused effort to bring together the indexers and the journals, DataCite and Crossref, along with the repositories and the use cases to look at the problem of crediting a collection. It's super sticky, but we happy to include this group. We've had our first session, but we're not finished. That's going to take a couple more sessions. And maybe it might take a funder to get this worked out. But we really want these collections to work because it helps reproducibility, because that's how, packaging something up like the purpose for this working group is important. But we haven't thought it through all the way through the production system of a journal, or even the workarounds that exist. The credit's not there. It's not happening. The automated credit, the machine readable credit, it's not happening. But if we keep talking about it and you all talk about to your funders that you care about this, boy, will that help me. That'll help me get the attention of the folks I need to get attention of. So right now, the indexers, I need a different solution than the indexers. And maybe we just have to figure this out. Astronomy goes around everything. They have their own indexing methodology that's very labor intensive, not scalable. So if you want to join our group, just send me an email, and boy, would I love to have you.
Fantastic. Can you drop, I may have missed it, but could you drop in the chat the link to your, I believe you said it's an RDA group, right? That would be, or in the notes.
Yeah, it's a pseudo RDA group. I invited all the chairs. You all should have gotten an email from me saying if you'd like to participate. We're trying to connect all the working groups that have something to do with this. It's sort of like I talked to Hillary Hanaho about how to do this. It's kind of like a focused surge effort pulling together all of the elements that could help here. So I'll find that information and put it in.
Terrific. That's great. I also wanted to mention, I alluded to it earlier, the group that's kind of organizing as a birds of a feather on canonical workflows. The topic of publication has come up in that as well. So we had a session earlier today and someone mentioned mandates to release data. So, I mean, I think it really dovetails with what we're talking about, where at the very end you're supposed to release it, but there's a whole chain of provenance and documentation that might be missing, and that's something that we can think about in terms of a workflow. And it looks like we may have lost Tumai. Oh, she's back. Okay, great. I just wanted to follow up. It just occurs to me something that George said, and I'm wondering what people might think about that, which is that in the distinction that George made between sort of workflow work, where what you're trying to do is document the workflow, versus these other practices and other, practices in other domains where the work really has to do with more of the specific data that's kind of like multiple and hierarchical and more complex. Whether maybe we can think of it as in terms of reproducibility, that the challenge for the first case where we're talking about workflow might be a challenge of documentation, whereas in the second case, so let's say more in the social science and the way people work in social science, the challenge might be more a packaging and then also documentation of that package workflow. Not sure what you think about that. So kind of like, you know, because in some disciplines we have people use workflows, actual workflows, and we heard that also a little bit from Volmar, you know, so there's something there that we can already document. And in other cases, things are more disparate. Things are more, people are using one-off solutions. There's little snippets of code, you know, maybe there the challenge is we can't necessarily get people to kind of put it all together in one workflow, and they wouldn't want to, you know, no researcher now wants to start doing things in a different way, but can we package that in a way that we can then kind of refer back to it and have it reproduce later on. I don't know if we still have George online, but I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that, but just a thought that I had about kind of like how to think about these kind of two different areas.
Well, it is difficult, and it's difficult also because, you know, people are using different software, and so I you know, if you you know, there's a difference between a workflow that has 10 steps, and those steps have been used by lots of people and they all know what they are, and a workflow that's a SAS or a STATA program that has 300 or 400 lines in it. It's a different problem, and I don't think we've got really good tools there. I mean, as you probably know, I've been working in that area, but in a certain way in the C2 metadata project and by creating SDTL, but that's not really what you're asking for. You know, our tools are oriented primarily towards documentation, and they're not about reproducibility per se. And you know, the biggest thing is that we know that it's really hard to get anybody to document code. Nobody likes to do that. It takes time, and it's hard to do. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to hear from Lars, because he's been right at the cusp of this in his work in the AEA, and he's got a lot of insight in it. So I'll shut up and pass it over to other people who have.
Okay, I think we're still on. I lost the picture for a minute, but let's hope we're still on. Lars, are you on? If you wanted to share with us any of your thoughts from your experience. It's hard for me to know if we are on. Are we on? Everyone connected? Okay, good. All right. I'm just talking to myself. Here we are. Yeah, I mean, I think to me, that just brings up a lot. It kind of like helps me organize my thinking a little bit. This idea of documentation as a necessary, you know, a necessary step and a necessary component, but not necessarily enough for reproducibility. And then what are the things that we might need on top of that? What do we need to know? What do we need to make sure we have? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, this has all been incredibly helpful, and I appreciate all of you commenting and participating in this. Lumor, should we go ahead and talk about our timeline?
I think so. I mean, I think unless anyone has any comments kind of following up on our conversation, and of course you can always add that to the collaborative notes even later, like when you're on your coffee break and you remember something, you can go back to the collaborative notes. That'd be great. It's interesting.
Join us again, you know,
join us again. Have another session. Just like a small note here, but Shelley, now that you sent that link to Zenodo, the Data Citation Community of Practice. It's so interesting because, I mean, I hate to say this, but just like we have so much to look at, and I did see that, but the data citation kind of threw me off. I wish I had known that it's so relevant to what we're doing. And so I will totally, I'm looking forward to, sinking into that and reading it. And I think it's totally relevant and such a great resource. So thank you.
We'll add that to the resource library. Yes,
for sure. All right. So yeah, if there are none, no other comments or questions at this time, we have a couple of things more that we wanted to share with everyone.
Great. Can we see that? Great. So this is our timeline. The CURE-FAIR working group was recognized back in July 2020. So we've been at this for a while, and we're headed towards the home stretch. So right now we're a year in to this working group since being recognized, and so we've shared with you, our first output and to let you know what we've been up to. And so subgroup 3 is wrapping up. They have that output, and we hope that you do have a moment to take a look at it and make comments if you'd like. And then subgroups 1 and 2 are still working to synthesize those practices and present all of those resources for definitions so we could get a sense of how curation for reproducibility is being defined. So you can still join those. We will be wrapping up our work, all the subgroup work, before the 18th RDA Plenary, and we'd like to get as many hands on deck for January 2020, which is our target date for our final deliverable. And this is when we'll be presenting our report on all of the recommendations and guidelines that we'll be offering about curation for reproducibility, and thinking about that in the context of FAIR. So we hope that you all are interested and would like to engage in any of those subgroups. Also in the notes, with the list of attendees, there is also a column. So if you'd like to be involved, please just put yes there or indicate that in that table. We would greatly appreciate it. So we are well on our way. We've done a lot of work. We've learned so much from all of you, but we know we could learn more. So please join us. And also, just as a reminder, we have all of those links also in the notes for joining one of those subgroups. So again, 1 is for the definition, subgroup 2 is looking at practices, and then also 4, which is creating those alliances with other RDA groups. So if you are a member of another RDA group and you see some commonalities, some things that we can share and exchange, then this would be a great opportunity for you. Shelley has given us resources. We also got resources through the poll of some references that we should take a look at as we're putting together some of our materials. So if you know of any others, please submit that resources. And then also, if you are an implementer, please fill out our form so that we can hopefully present a picture of what people and groups are doing to implement CURE practices. And like I just mentioned, if you'd like to comment on the report. So very, so it ranges. You could be as involved as you want, or if you just like to, throw us a reference or two, that would be great. But we definitely rely on all of your involvement, and hopefully what we produce is something that we all can use. So that's what we have. We just have a few more minutes left, about 6 minutes. So we could use this time to kind of close if there are any other comments, or if people right now want to just point out anything that you're up to, any references, things that can't be missed for this working group. I invite you to share that with the group.
I just wanted to thank everyone again. Yeah, Volmar, looks like you have some some ideas. I was just going to say, let's just have a conversation. We've got a little time.
Yes. So while we had the meeting, I was re-investigating one of my resources that I've been looking at before, and it seems like they've formed a German reproducibility network. And when I found that, it seems like there's a UK reproducibility network, and for Swiss, Australia, and Slovakia. So these might be good places to look for some feedback. And I mean, if there's any of you who's been involved in something like this, I'm kind of curious on how one would get started to form a network like this one.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I have been seeing some of these, and I imagine if it's a network, there'd be a wealth of information coming from these groups. So yes, if anybody is involved or knows more, please tell us more about it.
Does anyone have experience with Cascade in France? Just curious. I don't think that has come up. So definitely there are information we can get from this reproducibility networks, third-party verifiers, something like Cascade, journals, just thinking of, who is actually doing that. And then, third party. And then institutions themselves. The question of responsibility, I think, came up as an answer to some of the questions. But I find that a very interesting question too, is, who at the end of the day, who takes on the responsibility to make science reproducible? I mean, I think that we all think that the researchers, it's to a large extent in their hands, but not only. And so to me, that's a very interesting question, because it's not just a theoretical responsibility, right? Obviously, it's an investment of resources, and so forth. So, yeah. All right. Tumai, we can still see your screen.
Limor, could I say something about reproducibility? This is Shelley.
Hi.
I also think we need to value it. Like what is the reason? It's not just who's responsible for it, but why do we need what the researcher, what motivates the future, what motivates how does it benefit society? I think we need to, perhaps maybe not in your initial recommendations, but maybe as a follow-on, that promotion of its value.
That's a great point. I mean, I think that we've all, drank the Kool-Aid or whatever, but it's so obvious to us. And I do think that there's been a lot of advocacy on that, but I agree with you that there's more that can be done. And maybe more outlets, maybe can be done in other ways, but I agree that I think it's something we need to stress every time. I think that we in our working group, with the close alliance to some of the work that Victoria Staden has done, that it's really integral to science. The answer seems to be so obvious. And now that we have computational capabilities in a lot of disciplines, it's doable. We don't just need to report on what we do, we can actually show what we do. But yes, I think that is something that's a really good point, promoting the value of reproducibility. Yep, thank you. We're just about making our time, so that's a great note to end on.
Yes,
thank you.
It is. Thank all of you.
Awesome. So thank you. Thanks to my, thanks Shelley, and thanks everyone who participated. I don't know once it's past time if we're still like on or not, but I'm guessing we're still on. Yeah, I'm guessing that we would probably need to leave the room at some point soon to make room for others, but I don't know. Not sure how it works. But okay, great. So lots of stuff in the notes. It would be great to go back and fill in some things that we may have missed. And thank you, Tumai, for adding all of the responses.
Yes, I'll clean those up.
As the conversation started, I had a little bit of a hard time going back, and I didn't have enough time to like write down notes of what sparked some ideas when people were talking. But I think as I take a look at it later, that might happen. Hopefully will happen. Yeah, great. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll see you again soon.
All right, take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.